Howdy mates, how are we doing? I wanted to change up the theme of what I wanted to make for this video. Alright, so, for those of you who may be familiar with this term, I'm going to mention a little bit of something called lichens. And lichens are an example of a dual organism, which is usually between the relationship between a fungi and algae. So in a way, the algae and the fungi, they're like partners in a relationship. They both benefit one another. So the fungi help break down particular chemicals and organic materials, in which the algae then are able to provide for the photosynthesis. So essentially, the algae help provide food for the fungi. So they essentially share a relationship with one another in which they both benefit each other. So here we actually have an example of a powder-edged ruffle lichen, also known as Parmotrema stupium. So as you can see, kind of has like a gray upper surface, but then if you flip it over, let's see, I don't know how well you'll be able to see, but if you flip it over, it kind of has like a brownish black lower surface. So that's a good way you can tell by looking at the difference. So in a way, lichens kind of act like a blanket on trees. And they're not only found on trees, you can also find them on sidewalks, boardwalks too, and even rocks, as a matter of fact. So it's quite fascinating how oftentimes they are an overlooked organism found in nature. And another part that seems to be overlooked too is lichens are very essential, especially for particular birds, such as that of the white-breasted nuthatch. These white-breasted nuthatches, they like to forage on lichens. It's actually a part of their diet. And same thing goes for caterpillars, too, as a matter of fact. So in a way, lichens can serve as an excellent means of food for our fellow homies. And that's why we have to keep them. And not only that, but lichens, they can also serve as an excellent means of cryptic coloration, also known as camouflage. So even caterpillars and moths can blend in with the coloration of a lichen so that they're not so easily seen. And they're just quite amazing, honestly. And not only that, but why should we really care about them? Well, we should really care about lichens because they tend to indicate our air quality. Lichens in general are very sensitive to pollutants, especially sulfur dioxide. So the more lichens we see, whether it be on rocks, trees, sidewalks, boardwalks, that means we have better air quality. However, on the flip side, if we see less lichens in a given area, that means whatever area we're in could be experiencing even more air pollution than usual. So they are an excellent means of indicating air quality of where we are. So going back to this specific type of lichen, so as I mentioned earlier, it's called the powder-edged ruffle lichen. And you usually see them on hard-barked trees that are usually in the full sun, which, in a way, makes sense. We are practically right out in the sun, so it makes sense. But this particular powder-edged ruffle lichen falls under foliose lichens. It's a particular group. There are 3 separate groups. But to explain all of the particular lichens in one video, that's going to be impossible. So, in a way, this is going to kind of be like a new series that I'm going to start on. But foliose, essentially, so, as I mentioned, there are 3 separate groups. You have crustose, foliose, and fruticose. And no, don't try to confuse it with fructose. But foliose lichens are typically flat, and they're leaf-like, wherever they decide to reside. And not only that, but typically their lobes around the edges are kind of rounded, as you can see. You can kind of see it a little bit. I mean, I know like the sunlight is kind of in the way, but you can kind of see towards the edges that the lobes are a bit rounded. And they usually lie very flat on the substrate. And when I say substrate, I'm referring specifically to the tree, like what it's hanging on to. And if we actually look very carefully, too, if we look at the lower surface of another example, like right here, it kind of resembles looking at, you know, a plant root or something. And that's a common distinguishing feature of foliose lichens. But they are in 4 different layers, almost similar to that of a brain. They include the upper cortex, the algal layer, medulla, and the lower cortex. But yeah, they are quite remarkable. But yeah, they kind of act like a branch in a way. And they usually reproduce asexually. So you may be thinking, what exactly does that mean? Well, since they reproduce asexually, they can actually release spores from particular points on the lichen. So that means when they release their spores, they were spread to different areas and be able to reproduce. So I find lichen reproduction quite fascinating. I mean, there are even some that are able to reproduce sexually, which means there has to be a male and a female. But unlike asexually, it's just able to reproduce on its own. It doesn't need like a female counterpart or anything whatsoever. So like, the way I like to remember asexual reproduction is, in a way, you're kind of making a clone of yourself. So like if there was another Mr. Journey on a Journey right behind me, well, that would be sort of an example of asexual reproduction. But yeah, essentially they have the same genetic makeup in each individual lichen. And that's another thing when it comes to asexual reproduction, is the genetic makeup is exactly the same. Now, unlike with sexual reproduction, the genetic makeup is quite separate, even though there may be some similarities. But yep, there you go. That is the... I nearly forgot the name. Just a... Like I said, this is a bit new for me, so I'm still learning all the names. Either way. So, alrighty, mates. Thought I would share that with you guys. I hope you learned something. Like I said, this is a new thing that I'm going to start with when it comes to lichens. Because like I said, there's no way I can describe all of it in one video. So alright, mates. Hope you all learned something. And once again, Journey on a Journey is outwards. Take care, folks.